Chapter 1, Reproduction in Organisms. Each and every organism can live only for a certain period of time. The period from birth to the natural death of an organism represents its lifespan. Lifespan of a few organisms are given in figure 1.1. Several other organisms are drawn for which you should find out their lifespans and write in the spaces provided. Examine the lifespan of organisms represented in the figure 1.1. Isn't it both interesting and intriguing to note that it may be as short as a few days or as a long as a few thousand years? Between these two extremes are the lifespans of most other living organisms. You may note that lifespan of organisms are not necessarily correlated with their sizes. The sizes of crows and parrots are not very different, yet their lifespan show a wide difference. Similarly, a mango tree has a much shorter lifespan as compared to a peepal tree. Whatever be the lifespan, death of every individual organism is a certainty. No individual is immortal except single-celled organism. Why do we say there is no natural death in single-celled organism? Given this reality, have you ever wondered how fast number of plants and animal species have existed on earth for several thousands of years? Must be some processes in living organisms that ensure this community. Yes, we are talking about reproduction that we take for granted. Figure 1.1, Lifespan of some organisms. Reproduction is defined as a biological process in which an organism gives rise to young one's offspring. Similarly to itself, the offspring grow, mature, and in turn produce new offspring. Thus, there is a cycle of birth, growth, and death. Reproduction enables the continuity of the species generation after generation. You will study later in chapter 5, Principle of Inheritance and Variation, how genetic variation is created and inherited during reproduction. There is large diversity in the biological world, and each organism has evolved its own mechanism to multiply and produce offspring. The organism habitat, its internal physiology, and several other factors are correlated responsible for how it produces. Based on whether there is participation of one organism or two in the process of reproduction, it is of two types. When offspring is produced by a single parent with or without the involvement of gamete formation, the reproduction is asexual. When two parents opposite sex participate in the reproductive process and also involve fusion of male and female gamete, it is called sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. In this method, a single individual parent is capable of producing offspring. As a result, the offspring that are produced are not only identical to one another but are also exact copies of their parents. Are these offspring likely to be genetically identical or different? The term clone is used to describe such morphologically and genetically similar individuals. Figure 1.2, Cell division in unicellular organisms. A. Budding in yeast. B. Binary fusion in amoeba. Let us see how widespread asexual reproduction is among different groups of organisms. Asexual reproduction is common among single-celled organisms and in plant and animal with relatively simple organisms. In protists and monerans, the organisms or the parent cell divides into two to give rise to new individual. Figure 1.2 thus. Figure 1.3, Asexual reproduction structure. Zoospore of Chlamydomonas, Conidia of Penicillium, buds in Hydra, gumels in Spongy. In these organisms, cell divide is itself a mode of reproduction. Many single-celled organisms reproduce by binary fusion, where a cell divides into two halves and each rapidly grow into an adult. Example, amoeba perimecium. In yeast, the division is unequal and small buds are produced that remain attached initially to the parent cell, which eventually get separated and mature into new yeast organisms cells. Member of the kingdom fungi and simple plants such as algae reproduce through special asexual reproductive structures. Figure 1.3, the most common of these structures are zoospore that usually are microscopic motile structure. Other common asexual reproduction structures are conidia means pelicium, buds hydra, and gamules spongy. Figure 1.4, Vegetative propagules in angiosperm, A. Eyes of potato, B. Rhizome of ginger, C. Bulbil of agave, D. Leaf buds of bryophyllum, E. Offspring offset of water hyacinth. You have learned about vegetative reproduction in plant in class 11th. What do you think? Is vegetative reproduction also a type of asexual reproduction? Why do you say so? Is the term clone applicable to the term offspring formed by vegetative reproduction? While in animals and other simple organisms, the term asexual is used unambiguously. In plants, the term vegetative reproduction is frequently used. In plant, the unit of vegetative propagation such as runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, bulb are all capable of giving rise to new offspring. Figure 1.4. These structures are called vegetative propagules, obviously since the formation of these structure does not involve two parents. This process involved is asexual. You must have heard about the scourge of the water bodies or about the terror of Bengal. This is something but the aquatic plant water hyacinth, which is one of the most invasive weeds found growing wherever there is standing water. It drains oxygen from the water, which leads to death of fishes. You will learn more about it in chapter 13 and 14. You may find it interesting to know that this plant was introduced in India because of its beautiful flower and shape of leaves. Since it can propagate vegetatively at a phenomenal rate and spread all over the water bodies in a short period of time, it is difficult to get rid of them. Are you aware how plants like potatoes, sugarcane, banana, ginger, dahlia, and are cultivated? Have you seen small plants emerging from the buds called eyes of the potato tuber from the rhizome of banana and ginger? When you carefully try to determine the site of origin of the new plantes in the plants listed above, you will notice that they invariably arise from the nodes present in the modified stem of these plants. When the nodes come in contact with damp soil or water, they produce roots and new plants. Similarly, adventitious birds arise from the notches present at margin of leaves of bryophyllum. This ability is fully exploited by gardeners and farmers for commercially propagation of such plants. It is interesting to note that asexual reproduction is the common method of reproduction in organisms that have relatively simple organization like algae and fungi, and that they shift to sexual method of reproduction just before the onset of adverse condition. Find out how sexual reproduction enables these organisms to survive during unfavorable condition. Why sexual reproduction favored under such condition asexual vegetative as well as sexual nodes of reproduction are exhibited by the higher plants. On the other hand, only sexual mode of reproduction is present in most of the animals. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves formation of the male and female gametes either by the same individual or by different individual of the opposite sex. These gametes fuse to form the zygote, which develops to form the new organisms. It is an elaborate, complex, and slow process as compared to asexual reproduction because of the fusion of male and female gametes. Sexual reproduction results in offspring that are not identical to the parents or amongst themselves. A study of diverse organisms, plants, animals, or fungi show that though they differ so greatly in external morphology, internal structure, and physiology, when it comes to sexual mode of reproduction, surprisingly, they share a similar pattern. Let us first discuss what features are common to these diverse organisms. All organisms have to reach a certain stage of growth and maturity in their life before they can reproduce sexually. That period of growth is called the juvenile phase. It is known as vegetative phase in plant. This phase is of variable duration in different organisms. The end of juvenile vegetative phase, which marks the beginning of the reproductive phase, can be seen easily in the higher plants when they come to flower. How long does it take for marigold, rice, wheat, coconut, mango plant to come to flower. In some plants where flowering occur more than once, what would you call the interflowering period, juvenile or mature? Observe a few trees in your area. Do they flower during the same month year after year? Why do you think the availability of fruits like mango, apple, jackfruit, etc. is seasonal? Are there some plants that flower throughout the year and some others that show seasonal flowering? Plant the annual and biennial types show clear cut vegetative, reproductive, and sunset phases, but in the perennial species, it is very difficult to clearly define these phases. A few plants exhibit unusual flowering phenomenon. Some of them, such as bamboo species, flower only once in their lifetime, generally after 50 to 100 years, produce large number of fruits and die. Another plant, Strobilanthes kunthiana, Neela Kuranji, flower once in 12 year. As many of you should know, this flower during September to October 2006. Its mass flowering transformed large stretches of hills areas in Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu into blue scratches and attracted a large number of tourists and animals. The juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes prior to active reproductive behavior. The reproductive phase is also of variable duration in different organisms. Can you list the changes seen in human beings that are indicative of reproductive maturity among animals? For example, birds, do they lay eggs all through the years or is it a seasonal phenomena? What about other animals like frogs and lizards? You will notice that birds living in nature lays egg only seasonally. However, birds in captivity, as in poultry farms, can be made to lay eggs throughout the year. In this case, laying egg is not related to reproduction but is a commercial exploitation for human welfare. The females of placental mammals exhibit cyclical changes in the activities of ovaries and accessories duct as well as hormones during the reproductive phase. In non-primates, mammals like cows, sheep, rats, deer, dogs, tiger, etc., such cyclical changes during reproduction are called oyster's cycle. Whereas in primates, monkeys, apes, and humans is called menstrual cycle. Many mammals, especially those living in natural wild condition, exhibit such cycle during favorable season in their reproductive phase and are therefore called seasonal breeders. Many other mammals are reproductively active throughout their life reproductive phase and hence are called continuous breeders. That we all grow old if we live long enough is something that we recognize, but what is meant by growing old? The end of reproductive phase can be considered as one of the parameters of senescence or old age. There are concomitant changes in the body like slowing of metabolism, etc. During this last phase of lifespan, old age ultimately leads to death. In both plant and animals, hormones are responsible for the transitions between the three phases. Interaction between hormones and certain environmental factors regulate the reproductive processes and the associated behavioral expressions of organisms. Events in sexual reproduction. After attainment of maturity, all sexually reproducing organisms exhibit events and processes that have remarkable fundamental similarities, even though the structures associated with sexual reproductions are indeed very different. The events of sexual reproductions, though elaborate and complex, follow a regular sequence. Sexual reproduction is characterized by the fusion or fertilization of the male and female gametes, the formation of zygote, and embryogenesis. For convenience, these sequential events may be grouped into three distinct stages, namely the fertilization, and the post fertilization events. Pre fertilization events, these include all the events of sexual reproduction prior to the fusion of gametes. The two main pre fertilization events are gametogenesis and gamete transfer. Gametogenesis. As you are already aware, gametogenesis transfer of the process of formation of the two types of gametes, male and female. Gametes are haploid cells in some algae. The two gametes are so similar in appearance that it is not possible to categorize them into male and female gametes. Figure 1.5, types of gametes. Isogametes of cladophora in alga, heterogametes of fucus in alga, heterogametes of Homo sapiens human beings. They are hence called homogametes, isogametes, figure 1.5a. However, in a majority of sexual reproducing organisms, the gametes produced are of two morphologically distinct types, heterogametes. In such organisms, the male gamete is called the anthrozoid or sperm, and the female gamete is called the egg or ova, figure 1.5b and c. Sexuality in organisms. Sexual reproduction in organisms generally involve the fusion of gametes from two different individuals. But this is not always true. From your recollection of examples studied in class 11th, can you identify cases where self-fertilization is observed? Of course, citing such examples in plant is easy. Plants may have both male and female reproductive structures in the same plant, bisexual, figure 1.6c, or on different plants, unisexual, figure 1.6d. In several fungi and plant, terms such as homothallic and monoecious are used to denote the bisexual conditions, and heterothallic and dioecious are the terms used to describe unisexual conditions. In flowering plants, the unisexual male flower is staminate, bearing stamens, while the female is pistillate or bearing pistils. In same flowering plant, both male and female flowers may be present on the same individual monoecious or on separate individual dioecious. Dioecious plants are papaya and date palm. Name the type of gametes that are formed in staminate and pistillate flower. But what about animals? Are individuals of all species either male or female unisexual, or are there species which possesses both the reproductive organs bisexual? You probably can make a list of several unisexual animal species. Earthworms, figure 1.6a, spongy, tapeworm, and leech. Typical examples of bisexual animal that possesses both male and female reproductive organs are hermaphrodites. Cockroach, figure 1.6b, is an example of unisexual species. Cell division during gamete formation. Gametes in all heterogametic species are of two types, namely male and female. Gametes are haploid throughout the parent plant body from which they arise, may be either haploid or diploid. A haploid parents produce gametes by mitotic division. Does this mean that meiosis never occurs in organisms that are haploid? Carefully examine the flow chart of life cycle of algae that you have studied in class 11th, chapter 3rd, to get a suitable answer. Several organisms belonging to Monera, fungi, algae, and bryophytes have haploid plant body, but in organisms belonging to pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms, and most of the animals, including human beings, the parental body is diploid. It is obvious that meiosis, the reduction division, has to occur if a diploid body has to produce haploid gametes. In diploid organisms, specialized cells called meiocytes, gamete mother cell, undergo meiosis. At the end of meiosis, only one set of chromosomes. Figure 1.6, diversity of sexuality in organisms. A. Bisexual animals, earthworm. B. Unisexual animals, cockroach. C. Monoecious plant, Cara. D. Dioecious plants, Marcanitia. E. Bisexual flower, sweet potato, gets incorporated into each gamete. Carefully study table 1.1 and fill in the diploid and haploid chromosome number of organisms. Is there any relationship in the number of chromosomes of meiocytes and gametes? Gamete transfer. After their formation, male and female gametes must be physically brought together to facilitate fusion fertilization. Have you ever wondered how the gametes meet? In a majority of organisms, male gamete is motile and the female gamete is stationary. Exceptions are few fungi and algae, in which both types of gametes are motile. Figure 1.7a. There is a need for a medium through which the male gametes move. In several simple plants like algae, bryophytes, and pteridophytes, water is the medium through which this gamete transfer take place. A large number of male gametes, however, fail to reach the female gametes. To compensate this loss of male gametes during transport, the number of male gametes produced is several thousand times the number of female gametes produced. In seed plants, pollen grains are the carrier of male gametes and ovule have the eggs. Pollen grains produced in anther therefore have to be transferred to the stigma before it can lead to fertilization. In bisexual self fertilization plants, example peas, transfer of pollen grains to the stigma is relatively easy as anther and stigma are located close to each other. Pollen grains, soon after they are shed, come in contact with the stigma, but in cross-pollinating plants, including dioecious plant, a specialized event called pollination facilitates transfer of pollen grains to the stigma. Pollen grains germinate on the stigma, and the pollen tubes carrying the male gametes reach the ovule and discharge male gametes near the egg. In dioecious animals, since male and female gametes are formed in different individuals, the organism must evolve a special mechanism for gamete transfer. Successful transfer and coming together of gametes is essential for the most critical events in sexual fertilization. 1.2.2 Fertilization. The most vital event of sexual reproduction is perhaps the fusion of gametes. This process, called syngamy, results in the formation of a diploid zygote. The term fertilization is also often used for this process. The terms syngamy and fertilization are frequently used through interchangeably. What would happen if syngamy does not occur? However, it has to be mentioned here that in some organisms like rotifers, honeybees, and even some lizards and birds, turkey, the female gametes undergo development to form new organisms. Without fertilization, the phenomenon is called parthenogenesis. Figure 1.7. A homogenetic contact in algae B, germinating pollen grains on the stigma of a flower. Where does syngamy occur? In most aquatic organisms, such as a majority of algae and fishes, as well as amphibians, syngamy occur in the external medium, water, outside the body of the organisms. This type of gamete fusion is called external fertilization. Organisms exhibiting external fertilization show great synchrony between the sexes and release a large number of gametes into the surrounding medium, water. In order to enhance the chances of syngamy, this happens in the bony fishes and frogs where a large number of offsprings are produced. A major disadvantage is that the offspring are extremely vulnerable to predators, threatening their survival up to adulthood. In many terrestrial organisms belonging to fungi, higher animals such as reptiles, birds, mammals, and in a majority of plants, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms, syngamy occur inside the body of the organisms. Hence, the process is called internal fertilization. In all these organisms, eggs is formed inside the female body where they fuse with the male gametes. In organisms exhibiting internal fertilization, the male gamete is motile and has to reach the egg in order to fuse with it. In these events, though the number of sperms produced is very large, there is a significant reduction in the number of eggs produced. In seed plants, however, non-motile male gametes are carried to female gametes by pollen tubes. Post fertilization events. Events in sexual reproduction after the formation of zygote are called post fertilization events. The zygotes. Formation of the diploid zygote is universal in all sexually reproducing organisms. In organisms with external fertilization, zygote is formed in the external medium, usually waters. Wherever in those exhibiting internal fertilization, zygote is formed inside the body of the organisms. Further development of the zygote depends on the type of life cycles the organism has and the environment it is exposed to. In organisms belonging to fungi and algae, zygote develops a thick wall that is resistant to desiccation and damage. It undergo a period of rest before germination. In organisms with haplontic life cycle, as you read in class 11th, zygote divide by meiosis to form haploid spores that grow into haploid individual. Consult your class 11th book and find out what kind of development take place in the zygote in organism with diplontic and haplodiplontic life cycles. Zygote is a vital link that ensures continuity of species between organisms of one generation and the next. Every sexually reproducing organisms, including human beings, begin life as a single-celled, the zygote. Embryogenesis. Embryogenesis refers to the process of development of embryo from the zygote. During embryogenesis, the zygote undergoes cell division, mitosis, and cell differentiation. While division increases the number of cells in the developing embryo, cell differentiate helps groups of cells to undergo certain modifications to form specialized tissue and organs to form an organism. You have studied about the process of cell division and differentiation in the previous class. Animals are categorized into oviparous and viviparous based on whether the development of the zygote take place outside the body of the female parent or inside, whether they lay fertilized, unfertilized egg or give birth to young ones. In oviparous animals like reptiles and birds, the fertilized egg covered by hard calcareous shell are laid in a safe place in the environment. After a period of incubation, young ones hatch out. On the other hand, in viviparous animal, majority of mammals including human beings, the zygote develops into a young one inside the body of the female organisms. After attaining a certain stage of growth, the young ones are delivered out of the body of the female organisms. Because of proper embryonic care and protection, the chance of survival of young ones is greater in viviparous organisms. In flowering plant, the zygote is formed inside the ovule. After fertilization, the sepals, plant petals and stamens of the flower wither and fall off. Can you name a plant in which the sepal remain attached? A pistil, however, remains attached to the plant. The zygote develops into the embryo and the ovules develop into the seed. The ovary develops into the fruit, which develop a thicker wall called pericarp. It is protective in function. Figure 1.8. After dispersal, seed germinate under favorable condition to produce new offsprings. Figure 1.8. A few kind of fruits showing seeds S and protective pericarp P. Summary. Reproduction enables a species to live generation after generation. Reproduction in an organism can be broadly classified into asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction does not involve the fusion of gametes. It is common in organisms that have a relatively simple organization, such as the fungi, algae, and some invertebrate animals. The offsprings formed by asexual reproductions are identical and are referred to as clones. Zoospores, conidia, etc. are the most common asexual structures formed in several algae and plants and fungi. Budding and gemule formation are the common asexual methods seen in animals. Prokaryotes and unicellular organisms reproduce asexually by cell division or binary fusion. of the plant parent cell. In several aquatic and terrestrial species of angiosperm, structures such as runners, rhizomes, suckers, tuber, offsets, etc., are capable of giving rise to new offspring. This method of asexual reproduction is generally referred to as vegetative propagation. Several reproduction involve the formation and fusion of gametes. It is a complex and slower process as compared to asexual reproduction. Most of the higher animals reproduce almost entirely by asexual bisexual method. Events of sexual reproduction may be categorized into pre-fertilization, fertilization, and post-fertilization events. Pre-fertilization events include gametogenesis and gamete transfer, while post-fertilization events include the formation of zygote and embryogenesis. Organisms may be bisexual or unisexual. Sexuality in plants is varied, particularly in angiosperms, due to the production of diverse types of flowers. Plants are defined as monoecious and dioecious. Flower may be bisexual or unisexual flowers. Gametes are haploid in mature nature and are usually a direct product of meiotic division, except in haploid organisms, where gametes are formed by mitosis. Transfer of male gametes is an essential event in sexual reproduction. It is relatively easy in bisexual organisms. In unisexual animals, it occurs by copulation or simultaneously release. In angiosperms, a special process called pollination ensures transfer of pollen grains which carry the pollen grain to the stigma. Syngamy fertilization occur between the male and female gametes. Syngamy may occur either externally outside the body of organisms or internally inside the body. Syngamy leads to formation of a specialized cell called zygote. The process of development of embryo from the zygote is called embryogenesis. In animals, the zygote start developing soon after its formation. Animals may be either oviparous or viviparous. Embryonal protection and care are better in viviparous organisms. In flowering plants, after fertilization, ovary develops into fruit and ovules mature into seed. Inside the mature seed is the progenitor or of the next generation, the embryo.